Today, I'm going to talk about the vision of India in 2050, which is outlined and detailed in the paper, a policy paper by the same name in the EGROW Foundation. The vision of India is to move from a lower middle income country that we are today in 30 years by 2050 to a high income country. These divisions are World Bank classifications LIC, LMIC, UMIC, HIC. How can we get there? There are basically three pillars or broad goals we must have to achieve this high income country level by 2050. These are sustained fast economic growth, which we generally measure in terms of per capita GDP, equality of opportunities, and digital revolution. Now, fast economic growth is possible for a country at the LMIC level that we are because of something called catch-up growth to the technology frontier, which is represented by high-income countries. Equality of opportunity, when we talk about, we are talking about the usual disparities in gender, caste, religious, ethnic disparities. And we need to overcome this, and we will see how it can be done. And also the geographical divides like the urban-rural divide and the remote areas. And finally, the third pillar or third leg of this the goals of achieving this basic objective is the digital economy. The digital economy, in my view, will play a central role in creating a new hybrid economy. So, in terms of these three pillars, there's a virtuous circle. The use of equality of opportunity to drive growth, use fast growth to drive equality of opportunity, and use digital transformation to drive both. So we will start by looking at, the projections underlying projections have been done, and I will show you where is the final objective, 2050, what will India look like in terms of public welfare and economic power. These are two dimensions which is useful to focus on in examining where we are going to be in 2050. And I will show you the graphs, tables, etc. in slides 4 to 8. And we will come back to the issue of overall power, which includes military power in slide 19. So we will do this first, then we'll go on to detail how to accelerate and sustain growth, how to provide equal opportunity, and how to utilize the digital revolution to drive these two things. And finally, towards the end, I'll say a little bit about the green economy, which is also important given all these problems, global and Indian problems of climate change. So this is the first slide, and you see two graphs. One is the green graph, which uses the right-hand scale, which is the ratio of India's to US GDP per capita GDP over time. And there is the purple graph, which is whose scale is on the left, which is the ratio of India's to world GDP over time. Now, you can see that we are roughly here at this curve here. So this is the past, this is the future. You can see that we anticipate a faster catch-up with the world and with the USA, which is kind of the benchmark or standard that we use, both for welfare and for measuring power. So what does this graph show? So we can see from these graphs that India's per capita GDP will go from about 40% of world GDP to about 1.3 of 130%, sorry, 40% of world GDP here to 130% of world GDP by 2050, and we'll cross the average of the world GDP around this point, around just at the beginning of the 2040s. In terms of US, we are currently at only 10% of US per capita GDP, and by the end of 2050, we should be at 1/3 of US GDP. So that is how the per capita income, which is basically the measure of welfare of the public, the average welfare, will evolve. Now, so this is and then the standard of living or quality. We will look at the next table where some of the numbers I've given you. The endpoints are also given here, but what I want you to focus on is the note at this end. You know, we talk about reaching certain milestones in terms of average world GDP, but to help you imagine what it looked like, I give you two numbers from this table. The first one, if you look at India here, India's rank in per capita income terms will go from about 177 today to about 90 in 2050. But even to make it more concrete, in 2050, you look at this note, we'll be about where the European countries were in the 1990s. So the per capita GDP of India would be of the order of 34,500 in terms of 217 international dollars, and we can compare it with the past. We can see that this was approximately the per capita GDP of UK in 1997, and Australia in 1997, and Japan in 1999, and Spain in 2000 or so. So effectively, the standard of living of India in 2050 will be what the European countries were in the 1990s. So if you want to imagine, if you've been to Spain or any of these countries, you can imagine what the India of 2050 would look like. Now, what about in terms of economic power? So focus on this red graph, which is the VIP index. And again, we are, and this measures the ratio of India's and China's VIPP per capita GDP in US terms and in PPP terms. Though most of our analysis is in PPP terms, I have here given also in green the ratio in US dollar terms, because that's what a lot of public discussion is on. Now, what is going to happen? Let's see what are the highlights of the changes we are going to see from now on. We are down here and we are going to moving up these curves over the next 30 years. So what do they show? So India's GDP PPP will double from 40% of China's in 2019 to 80% of China's. This was in the table which I showed you earlier. The numbers you can go back and look at them. But in terms of these graphs, the India's economic power is projected, measured in terms of VIPP index, which I have devised, is projected to increase from 0.15 here to 83% over here, this red graph. Okay, and the red graph is actually the relative economic power. What I'm telling you is the numbers from the table, where India's economic power measured in VIPP is projected to increase from 15% to 83%. So a huge change in the economic power of India. But in terms of China, which is represented on this graph, it will go from 27%, roughly around here, to 62%. So in some sense, China's power, because China's growth will be much higher than the US and the world average, we will catch up with it slower than we will catch up with the rest of the countries. So China will remain one of the fastest growing countries in the world. The second point to note here is that the usual focus on per capita GDP in US dollar terms, this green curve, is almost the same as the VIPP index in 2019. So what that suggests is, this dollar values are very hard to predict because they depend on exchange rate changes and all kinds of temporary factors. And therefore, roughly for the future, this VIPP also captures, in a sense, the projection of the relative changes which are going to occur in the dollar values, which you will be looking at and which is available usually much more often. So this is summary of what I have just said. Now, from that, having seen where we want to go and what we are likely to achieve, let us look at how we will get there. So the basic element of this, of course, three elements we pointed out. The first is fast economic growth. Now, what are the important factors which we have to focus on, the government has to focus on to achieve this fast economic growth? So first is to be a greater clarity on the role of government, private sector and social sector. This is beginning to happen. It is underway. That is part of the reforms. We have some of the reforms we discussed earlier. Government must focus on the provision of public goods and the regulation of externalities. This is very important. We will have a little bit of the details here. We've talked earlier about public goods, infrastructure, etc., and we'll go into it in the policies. And secondly, it must create a market environment which is pro-competition, anti-monopoly. And then, of course, it must make sure the welfare transfers to the poor and to support the weak who are not capable of taking care of themselves in the economy. The private sector, once this macro environment is provided by the government, it's the job of the private sector to compete, innovate and invest. We really have to depend, because they are the efficient drivers of growth everywhere in the world. So we have to make sure they have the right environment. Then the social sector, the welfare part of it, that has two elements. One, as I mentioned, it's government is easier to provide money than to undertake all the detailed social provision. So we need a social sector, a community sector or a social sector. We usually call them NGOs or NPOs, but I prefer to call them community sector or social sector, which supports the special needs of disabled and disadvantaged people in the community, especially the physical and mental health of these. The social sector is much better positioned and much more efficient in providing the actual service, even though much of the money may be raised from the government or, of course, from society, both. And then the second sets of elements which to keep in mind, which underlie the fast economic growth, is that the paper lays out the global demography and how the global comparative advantage will shift for India from unskilled to semi-skilled to skilled labor, and how we can exploit it through various means, including the new technologies like AI, expert systems, etc., to leverage semi-skilled labor. Now you may think, why not create make everybody into skilled labor? It's not possible because even today there is actually a shortage of skilled labor. So certainly we have to step up our effort to generate more skilled labor. It is being used in R&D labs in Bangalore, MNC labs. Everybody has set up. So there's a huge demand for skilled labor already, and we are falling behind. We have to step up this generation of skilled labor, but we also have to use semi-skilled labor more effectively because and this can be done through these expert systems and AI. Now, growth environment. I mentioned creating a competitive market environment for sustained fast growth. These are things which are put down and listed. We know some of them. A few of them will elaborate. The policy reform. I'll give you a list. We've discussed policy reforms earlier, and I just mentioned them here. And of course, underlying all this is, of course, decontrol and making it easier for government to do business. We'll say a little bit more about the list of reforms, reiterate them. And then institutional reforms. This is something which I cannot overemphasize because it's not still greatly appreciated, that in many instances of externalities, infrastructure, we need modern professional regulatory systems, whether it's financial system, whether it's the digital economy, and it's very important to keep in mind, and one of the functions of such a modern system is ease of regulatory compliance. We have got all these legacies, we need to work on this in the shorter term. And then of course is the legal system, the economic contracts, the whole market economy rests in the foundation of contracts and the legal system which enforces them. So we need to do more institutional reforms. Again, a number of reforms like arbitrage, arbitration, etc. in process, but we need to do more. And then of course the criminal justice system. And finally, social reform. So what are the key elements of social reform as far as growth environment is concerned? We must facilitate the increase in female labor force participation. The female labor force participation in India is abysmal compared to all developed countries and many developing countries. So we need to use this. It's an underutilized resource which is necessary to use to sustain this fast growth over 30 years. And then we need to break the barriers to occupational mobility. Example which created by caste or other things. Why? Because when the best people, people go to the best jobs, and not only they benefited, but the whole society benefits. So the growth rate actually is enhanced by this. It's not just a question of facilitating individual people and equality, not just a welfare or social measure, but it also helps. So policy reform. So the most important ones, we are familiar with most of these, and I will just put them down. So goal is competitive economy without monopoly rents. Taxation simplification, we have talked about reforms of the GST, custom duty reform, simplification and reform of direct tax code. Financial and capital market reform so that the capital markets generate less NPAs and debilitating NPAs and allocate the capital to its best uses. Best use, efficient use means it will promote faster growth. Labor laws have been codified, new 4 codes, but the rules and regulations, simple rules which will actually be on the ground and make labor intensive growth possible are still in process and must be completed. Land and real estate is a big problem because most of the laws are state laws, and we know there are 29 different states and different rules and regulation, but what the center can do is make model state laws and rules and try to implement them in UTs which are under its control. Supply chains, we have talked about this earlier, a dualistic trade policy and other elements of supply chain, the tariff reform, EXIM policy reform. Urban, we need integrated planning, development and administration. Right now it's fragmented. The state agencies from the state top have their own silos going to the urban areas. What we need is an integrated urban for large areas, metro areas. Each of them need an integrated administrative planning development structure. It's even more important because many research papers have estimated that India's urbanization will need to double over the next few decades, and this is part and very important part of that fast sustained growth. Controls and regulation we have discussed. I just want to mention water and irrigation, which is a great future problem, partly because of climate change, but partly because of pollution and overuse of underground water, etc. And this could become a serious constraint on growth unless we address it. Social welfare. We talked about social welfare. Now, as I mentioned earlier also, growth is necessary for social welfare because it generates the revenues which can be used to give transfers to those who are needy. But the other elements of social welfare which are sometimes neglected is, one is access to public goods. Now public goods are things which are used and available to everybody. They are not charged for. So, but the quality can differ. the quality of public goods in richer areas or certain types of localities, etc., can be better than in others. So we need to provide the same quality of public and quasi-public goods, as we call them, like basic education, which we'll discuss more later, must be provided if we are to have social welfare, growth enhancing welfare. Direct benefit cash transfers are very important because they are more efficient. We've discussed these earlier. Community public partnership. I mentioned social and community role, and the micromanagement. For example, groups, specialized groups. If you have blind people, differently disabled, or mentally handicapped, or groups of orphans, the government must, of course, provide the funds, but they are very bad at ensuring that the full deserved and required quality of service is given. So community participation, community public participation is very important for ensuring that we take care of these groups, as a developed society should be able to do. And finally, the equality of opportunity is critical for social welfare and economic growth. And I want to contrast this with the Marxist view of equality of opportunity, which is a delusion. Nowhere in the world have they attained the kind of equality of outcomes which the Marxian socialists have been pushing on the world for a century or more. What is important, however, is equality of. So, as I was saying, the geographical disadvantage in rural areas, because many of the government schools, etc., there's huge absenteeism. Absenteeism in the schools, the teachers don't go there because they are generally urban based, and this problem has been there for decades and decades, and we've tried every method to solve it. And same with health workers, doctors, and we have to do something new. That's what the objective of this is. So, education and skills, quality differences. I have already mentioned rural. Public health education, public health and public health education. The endemic has shown us that this is a very important issue, and we need to think and do new things for this. What we have been, we have relatively neglected this aspect for ages, because when we think of health, we are generally thinking of personal health services. Whether a person has lung problems, heart problems, etc., etc. The personal health. Now, that is obviously important, and there is a huge quality problem. It's not just a question of public or government health centers, but even the private. If you go to the rural areas, there have been research studies which show that the quality of service provided to people who pay for these services is abysmal. So, question of how to improve the quality of information with the providers and with the users of these services to give greater welfare benefits. And then similarly, employment and job opportunities. In many areas, there are social networks of people from rural areas connected to their social network in urban areas. So only that the people who are connected in that network can get the jobs. So, for example, there is a network of plumbers from Odisha in Delhi. So only from that locality and people who know those people apparently come and become plumbers here. But what we want to do is we want to get everybody a chance everywhere in the country to get the jobs and to apply for, to train for the jobs. And we have to remove the information bias, which is an obstacle to greater equality of opportunity. And one of the paradoxes of information is, if I am some guy, in some remote village in the northeast or in Bihar, I won't even know about the opportunities, and if I knew, for example, that there are opportunities for electricians or carpenters and where to find the skills, how to get skill training, then a lot more people, good quality, better quality people would also become that. One important element of this, which bridges, the equality of opportunity and the growth, fast growth, is the knowledge economy. So access to information, basic education and digital literacy is going to be a key. So we must, every youth in the country must have certain basic quality of education and digital literacy, because that's very important now for searching for information that a person needs. Uh, and then job skills, be able to search for the skills. I mentioned to you electrician, but this applies to every kind of job and work knowledge. Uh, so access to information is going to be the key for this growth which I have outlined. And then because such a large proportion of public don't work for formal job, they are self-employed. Okay, therefore the knowledge about supply chains, and there are so many MSMEs and self-employed, that being able to connect, to know what are the supply chains, how to connect into them, both the national, domestic, regional, global supply chain, that access to that information is critical. Another element of the knowledge economy is teaching the teachers, training the trainers. Much of the focus has been on schooling uh, and uh, and higher education, but higher education, just having a teacher having a degree, let's say in history, doesn't make him a good history teacher. Having a degree um, in science, in math or physics, doesn't make him a good math, science or physics teacher. So teaching the trainers how to teach, teaching the teachers to teach, and training is an important element which is necessary for propagation of education and knowledge, of quality of education. Skill standards and certification. There are across the world there are 4,000 to 6,000 formal skills like speech therapists, physical therapists, besides the usual thing you think of, nurses, etc., etc. Trainers, physical trainers, many different skills and standards. But to make the markets competitive and open to all, there has to be standards and certification. This is something which the Skill Development Corporation, etc., was supposed to do, but this job is still incomplete. Having the skills and standards and certification, having institutions for propagating this, and getting the information available to everybody in the country is important. And the new economic policy which has been introduced tries to do that, has one of its goals as doing this. Higher education and frontier skills. I already mentioned that there is a shortage of highly skilled staff because of the R&D thrust, where a lot of the R&D which has moved out of the US and Europe has actually gone to Israel and India. India is one of the big beneficiaries of this outsourcing of R&D. So, but besides that, also knowledge of global value chains. So, right now the MNCs are doing R&D in India, certainly know about these value chains, but the other companies, the Indian companies, the smaller, brighter techno entrepreneurs, may not have all the information. So we have to create these knowledge chains where everybody in India can access and find out what are the global value chains and to key into them. Then AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence is very important, but there is a slight difference. Unlike countries which whose labor force is going down, their demographics are such that their population is actually declining. Many countries in Europe, even China now, starting from the next, this decade, will be losing people, will be having lower, at some point, working age population. So they are using AI and ML to substitute for labor. What we need to do is use it for enhanced labor. So we have to focus on AI and expert systems, where certain somewhat lower, one category lower skilled people than the one actually who does this kind of work can multiply its resources. So, for example, if you give a doctor or who has trained only for 1 to 3 years, let's say instead of a full 4-year course or a short half course, if you give them AI expert systems, they can treat twice the amount of patients with double the quality. Or, for example, there are these so-called doctors, compounder doctors in many rural areas who prescribe medicine without having any knowledge of it. If they can have access to the health expert systems, they can actually avoid making many mistakes they currently mistake. So to use semi-skilled labor to enhance their quality of work they are already doing right now. So and then lastly, the information knowledge resources. As I mentioned, the information paradox. Somebody who doesn't know about something can't even know where to find it. So you have to make it easy for people by creating digital libraries, providing access to Indian languages, through Indian languages, and massive online courses, etc. To use all these elements to facilitate the spread of information and knowledge. Digital economy, the third pillar which I mentioned, very critical. Why is this so important for achieving that objective which we have set for ourselves of becoming a high-income country? There are 2 or 3 problems which arise from India's large size. India's population is approximately double the entire population of EU and US as a high-income country and EU high-income countries. So the scalability problem is huge. To provide the same level of public goods, the same level of education, the same level and quality of health is a huge, huge job, which these countries did over half a century or more, a full century. Okay, we have to do this in 30 years, and this is, in my view, only possible through use of the digital economy, through tele-education, telemedicine, fintech, and all the other things, some of which we'll go into a little more later. And finally, secondly, the digital economy converts local public goods into partly regional and national public goods. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are 2 or 3 elements of this. One is that, every village cannot have a high school, right? So their local public goods are primary schools. You can have a primary school, it's a local public good, but it will depend on what kind of teachers are available in the village or can come to the village. So you do not get, you don't get that benefit and so one of the things which we said was this tele-education can reach down people who are based in urban areas, etc., can provide you input through the digital economy. And the second is that economies of scale and scope. So when we talk about urban conglomeration, why do urban conglomeration occur? Because there are certain economies of scale in providing certain things. A school is larger than a primary school, a secondary school, and a college is even larger. So you have to have a lot more people who attend that college. So there is economies of scale, okay? And then there are economies of scope. So you can't have a college in every village or in every small town. So, but the benefits of that economy can go to the rural areas through the internet and through the digital economy. So this remote supply helps in converting and reducing to some extent, not 100%, the distinction between local public goods and regional public goods. This is a very important issue in economics. Then there is access to information. We've already talked about access and knowledge and how to gain the knowledge. Remote access to jobs. This is a huge development which has been accelerated by the pandemic, and it is going to help us transform the access of jobs. So work from home, what does it imply? Now think of traditional Indian society, which many people, there are some of us who encourage our wives and daughters to go out and work, but there are many others in society who restrain their, female family members from going out to work. So what this work from home movement and the digital economy will do is going to tremendously increase the possibilities and scope of working for these people who are constrained to work from home. Okay? And similarly, for example, Dalits in a village, because the village or a small town is a very closed society. People frown down on certain people who they are badly, wrongly. Again, I'm not saying everybody is like that, but a lot of people in many villages are like that. who will discourage or even try to stop a Dalit from having a job which they think is not, which they think they should have. So what this work from home, work from anywhere movement will do is will remove or dilute some of these constraints, because it will make it possible. It's not so public. It is quieter. You can do it from home. You can do it from a different village. You could be working in one city and located in another, which is more better and less discriminatory, and still have that job. So this is going to be a tremendous boom, which will help transform equality of opportunity and sustain this high rate of growth. What else? What are the elements of this digital? So one of the things I envision happening in this 30 years is that we could be the pioneers of optimizing a digital physical hybrid economy. But to do this and to promote the digital economy, we need certain things. The government needs to do, the private sector needs to do certain things. So first, of course, is the hard infrastructure of the connectivity, digital divide. Already government has been doing electricity, highways, road connectivity of village, and also now has a plan to connect the India Net or Bharat Net to every panchayat, village and habitation. So that is absolutely critical. And this has been a little slow. I expect and hope that the government will now proceed very rapidly to do this connection. A new policy of PPP has been announced, etc. So government is focused on it, but we must all ensure that this occurs as soon as possible. And then, of course, another element of access is that the poorer people, not everybody can afford a laptop. So all government service centers, government schools, private health, primary health centers, secondary health centers, and all government facilities have internet centers which can be used by the poorer people to end this digital divide. And not just a divide, I don't look at it negatively, I look at it positively, because this will raise the productivity of these people, the people who have the facility, and enormously benefit the entire Indian economy. Then systems infrastructure. This is very important because the economics of the digital economy is still being understood, and I'll tell you some of the challenges at the end. But the government not only needs to regulate, which is the second point, regulatory systems which deter monopoly while promoting innovation. And because of these new challenges to competition, which are called network externality, data as a natural resource, and much deeper economies of scale and scope, which are just becoming to be understood. Biases in algorithms. If an individual who is hiring is biased, it's usually easier to identify that person and do something about it if the government really wants or if society wants. But algorithms, the bias is hidden. It's very important. So one is this regulatory system is critical to the competitive development of the digital economy. But another thing which India is pioneering in the terms of the universal payment interface, the health stack, the operating systems of the digital economy. I think we are pioneers in that there are certain quasi-public goods, which I mentioned, which we generally think of in the physical economy or the financial sector. These are going to be very, very important. The platforms, the interfaces like the UPI, the stacks like the health stack, and I'll say more of that later. But these have to be provided if we are going to get the full benefits of the digital economy. So universal interfaces, what do we mean? Of course, one of them is e-governance, like the provision of government services through the internet, forms, permissions, etc., regulation, filing of regulation, taxes, etc. All that is already underway, but needs to be accelerated so we can get the entire population can get the full benefit. The MSMEs can get the benefit, etc. Then there are new proposals which I have been making for some time, made in the budget, the welfare stack, which consists of all the central and state government's welfare program, UID and mobile delivery. The health stack, of which public health stack is very important, to monitor epidemics, to be able to identify, isolate, monitor, public participation in identifying these things. The stack which can do that. The health stack government is already on. The community stack or a community interface which embodies the values of Indian society. A recent Pew survey has shown that 80% of Indians believe in Indian values. So we need not adopt all the values of social media which is coming from the US or China. We can build our own interface. That doesn't mean we are trying to keep out these companies, these giant social media companies, but we can build a community interface which is the bottom of the stack on which every company, Indian companies, small companies, large companies and foreign MNCs can all operate according to the values and platform created with Indian values, which provides fair competition to all. Similarly, universal financial interface on the pattern of payment interface, universal market interface. Government has created e-GOM, which is only for government sales and purchases. But there could be a universal market interface, which on top of which all e-commerce companies could operate. The important is the algorithms which drive it. Then our government knows what they are. They can ensure that they are fair, because it's very hard for the regulators. In principle, the regulators could also regulate this, but in my view, at least in the beginning, we need to do both. We need to have a platform and we need to regulate the existing platforms. But future MSMEs, etc., markets can be built on, specialized markets can be built on top of this new universal market interface. Then knowledge stack, sector-specific industry, to make it easier to get knowledge, to get higher education, to generate skills, to have an interchange where skills can be marketed, supply and demand of skills. There are already exchanges which are operating in the West, but we need to do this ourselves, because our skills then can be language skills, or it can be a skilled person in, let's say, Kannada or some other language who wants to, who's learned in education, can go in and offer their services, in a different language. So that ends the three pillars. Before I come back to the conclusion and some more elements of the economic power which I mentioned at the start, just want to quickly go over the green economy, which is also going to be important. For example, the digital economy will substitute for transport. So transport system can be more efficient and less energy using. So the transport efficiency can be improved in this green economy. So Indian economy will become much more greener in 2050. That is the point of this. Energy, we already we initiated a solar alliance. We are going in for solar power, etc. Being a sun, having the advantage of natural resource, sun resource, energy. Urban integrated planning is very important. I think I mentioned this before. Natural cities, there's a concept that I and a co-author have developed of natural cities, which are more energy efficient. Then housing design, we need more housing which uses local materials, more energy efficient designs. Recycling, India is a highly recycled economy, much more than developed countries, but we need to pioneer designs of durables, consumer durables and others, which have much more repairable parts. So certain parts can be reused, or certain parts are repairable. The Western economy has developed a throwaway economy. So going forward in the green economy is going to be important because of climate change and everything else, and therefore we need to pioneer in these designs. Environmental regulation, we need something like an environmental protection agency which is professional, etc. And then we need to develop green tax, info exchanges, etc. So before I conclude, I want to say a little bit. We had talked in the beginning about economic power. I want to go into overall power and India's role in the world, which include other elements besides economic power. So in 15 years ago, I had projected that the world would become tripolar and by 2050, and in the meanwhile we would go through a period of bipolar and multipolar plurilateral transition. That is what is happening. But let us take stock. The new projections which have been done after the pandemic uh, supports this conclusion. So go quickly over it. So India will join US and China as a economic great power by around 2040, and by 2050, as I had indicated, according to the VIPP index of potential power or economic power, we will be at 83. But some of the implications of this is that India will be a very important economy on par with the EU, and we will have a convertible currency. We'll have a much more open capital account, and all these things are part of the paper. I show how we get there and its role in South Asia, Asia, etc. But here I want to talk about the other elements. So to be an overall power, what we have missing at this point, which we have to develop and we are starting to develop, is a military industrial complex. The strategic defense technology, we have fairly strong in space and missiles and atomic energy, but there are many other areas of frontier technology which we need to do much more and emphasize much more and do more on. So we need to set up a defense R&D commission which will focus on these technologies which are not covered by the Space Commission and the Atomic Energy Commission. Now, coming back to the industrial complex, it's very important. People don't realize, and we get misled sometimes when we see these fancy planes that announcements from other countries saying, oh, we have developed this great plane, okay, and they show you one copy or a prototype of it or one flying. Well, to win wars, you have to mass produce planes. You need hundreds of planes, okay? So you need a military industrial complex. If your military industrial complex is not of the quality of the prototype plane which you have designed and one copy or three copies developed, you will not be able to win wars. So the military industrial complex is very important. And the mistake we made is to create a monopoly of the government. But we are opening up now, very good, but it's going to take time because we are just really starting. The second point I want to make on this is that given that there's a dangerous imbalance at this current time, which in my analysis of the multipolar world of USA, China, and India, I had at that time thought it would be from 25 to 35, which would be a dangerous because one of the three powers, China, had a very negative and aggressive attitude towards the others. That's exactly what is played out, but it's played out even faster than I had anticipated. So we are already in this dangerously imbalanced situation, which I had thought would start in 25. So the key at that point I had pointed out would be the strategic cooperation between India and US. And given that this imbalance has come faster than even I expected, this cooperation is now critical in the terms of hard military strategic elements of the relationship. Of course, the threat of military aggression is more for the neighbors, which is India, Japan, Taiwan, etc., Vietnam. But the grey war or hybrid war, which is already in play, for example, Australia was threatened by it. So that goes way beyond the neighbors. So for dealing with the grey war, we need 3 or 4 elements. We need high-tech decoupling to thwart China's S-read strategy. What is S-read? It is spy, reverse engineer, and develop. So it has many elements, but without, and it has developed a massive infrastructure all across the world to do this spying and stealing. So and without high-tech decoupling, we cannot stop this. Okay, so it's very critical, this high-tech decoupling, which is starting, but I'm not sure there are enough people who still realize the importance of this. in winning this or deterring an aggressive China or aggressive PRC. The second is partial economic decoupling. CP has used asymmetric economic, trade, technology, FDI policies to monopolize many sectors of manufacturing and to extract rents from the rest of the world. Again, the only way to stop this, to reduce the rents, it is not that we want to stop trade. We want to diversify monopolies. We want competitive products from other countries. We want to reduce the rents which CCP derives from this. And the only way to do it is partial economic decoupling and diversification of supply chain. And the best instrument, I believe, for doing it is the Quad and the Quad Plus. So Quad has a big role in this gray war or hybrid war. And finally, because so many experts, there are experts on economics and there are experts on strategy who get confused by this issue, I want to end with this. This is the paradox of China and India's rise as an economic power. In 2050, India's power rank will be 3, economic power rank, but its income rank will be 90. Okay? Why this disparity? The disparity arises because for the first time in history, there are no national constraints of technology and capital. So India will have access to, China has had till now, free access to international capital and international technology. So will be going into the future. And this means that we can have power based on our larger population if we utilize it fully. I've already told you all the ways we need to do ourselves to utilize our population, and the working population. So if we utilize it, we can become a bigger power. That is why our rank in power will be 3. But that doesn't make us as rich as all the countries. There will be lots of countries, 80 countries by this very rough calculation, almost 90 countries, whose income rank, whose per capita income will still be higher. But there could be very tiny countries. There could be a country of 100,000 people, some rich island which depends on tourism. It could be a country of 1 million people who for other reasons or lots of other reasons, there could be a country of 50 to 100 million people. So there could be 90 other countries, but they can't equal us in power just because they have 2 times, 3 times, 4 times of our income. So it's a paradox, but it's not really if you keep this difference in population in mind. Okay, so to conclude, by 2015, we will be we can become a high-income country with the average quality of life which is prevailed in the UAE around 1995, in the 90s. There are 3 pillars for achieving it: sustained fast growth in per capita income, equality of opportunity for all citizens using underutilized human resources, and using the digital economy to provide high quality social services, upgrade human resources, and drive the innovation in the hybrid economy. With that, thank you.